Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're watching. Welcome back to the Boma Global Virtual Summit live stream. I'm Ralph Talmont, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Boma Poland team who will be taking care of you for the next 2 hours. Zuzana Lewandowska, Filiberto Amati, and Ola Dudek. There they are. We've been preparing for this on Zoom over the last 10 days, and this is what we look like. It's been suggested to me several times in the last couple of weeks that what we're going through now is a stress test for society. A stressor has been introduced into an already highly pressurized system, and the system has been found wanting. Over the next 2 hours or so, we'll be examining the possible fracture points in business and in society, and looking for ways to reinvent our world in this new reality. If I may go full Aristotle on you to begin with, the future which is known cannot be changed, and the future which can be changed cannot be known. So we have a choice. We may choose to use this current crisis as a wake-up call, a reset button, an awakening. All of these metaphors and more have been used over the last few days and weeks. A clarion call, maybe, leading us through the valley of tears towards a more positive future for us all. Or we may do the very human thing of pushing hard to have things return to just how they were before, as soon as we think the danger has passed. Unfortunately, wishing to return from hold on a second. Just one moment. Just getting a message from the engine room. That's Filiberto pouring oil over the overheating drive shaft. Very good. So in any case, we may try to do the very human thing of pushing back, to return to the reality, the way which we've been used to, as soon as we think the danger has passed. But there is no going back. That reality is gone. We are surrounded by latent images, burnt into our retinas and our memories. So being in self-quarantine right now may seem like a temporary measure to allow for health authorities to combat the disease more efficiently, a temporary measure which will be turned off, just like you take a plaster off once the cut has healed. Before too long, however, that temporary measure will turn into new ways of behavior and modes of being. We will have to adjust to those, and this is one of the main themes we'll be covering over the next couple of hours. We'll be discussing the broad context and consequences of this current pandemic. We will hope to make some sense of it with the help of some truly extraordinary guests. We're very grateful for their time and contribution because, as you will see, they are not people who have lots of time on their hands. If you'd like to stay part of this community, head on to our webpage at Facebook page, facebook.com/Boma Poland. And if you're watching somewhere other than Facebook, the only way that you can actually ask questions, and we would love you to do so, is on that Facebook page. Or you can tweet at us at Boma Poland, or you can tweet at me directly at Ralph Talmont. So let's go. Our first guest is a strategic foresight practitioner. In plain language, this means he spends his days helping companies and governments envisage various likely scenarios of how the future might unfold. Since the magical technology of crystal balls appears to have been lost in time, he relies on imagination and sophisticated technical tools. And it just so happens that last year, he and his team ran a series of pandemic preparedness scenarios for the government. Please welcome Kacper Nosarzewski. Kacper, Can
Good
you
evening,
tell us,
Ralph. Good evening, everyone. Hi.
can you tell us what you found when you ran those various scenarios? Is it unfolding more or less as you envisaged?
Hi, thanks for having me. Well, for the purpose of doing scenarios in strategic foresight is never to have a more precise or even more precise forecast. Strategic foresight comes to terms with the fact that future cannot be predicted, that you cannot have a very accurate prediction. So it's better to have several models of a future that are rather likely, they are more probable than not, and that do not differ very much between themselves in probability, so that they all seem likely, they all seem plausible, they all seem realistic. And you feed these different models of the future, so these different scenarios, to a decision maker or to a community of decision makers or policy makers, and you try to reframe their thinking about economic phenomena, social phenomena, resilience, like we are testing it here and now with the COVID pandemic. They're trying to reframe them and see if they can come up with some new questions, or if they can come up with some new strategies or plans that are more flexible and that are beyond the status quo of what is accepted as standard policy or as
Did they do that?
Well, of course, yes. Foresight has been around for 60 to 70 years already, and it started with the military industrial conglomerates of the United States, with the US Air Force and Rand Corporation. So in the beginning, it advised military and defense technology spending and investment in the United States. But because it works, it has since been adopted by big corporations and by governments as well. So the same people who laid foundations of my discipline of strategic foresight with methods such as the Delphi method, the scenario analyses, and many more, they have then filtered, they have then transferred these techniques and methods to the civilian world, and they have worked rather well. The constant demand for our services, 4CF is the only such company in Poland that specializes in this serious gaming Delphi scenarios for decision making, that really advises policymakers, really advises corporate decision makers on the strategic choices. Well, these methods are the demand for them is rather constant and growing, because there is the right feeling, that there is the right premonition even in amongst the decision makers, that the future may really become very wild and may surprise us in many ways. So it's better to avoid the avoidable surprises, allowing for the very unexpected for wildcards to materialize, but being more or less aware of the possibilities and of the things that are likely. And the global pandemic was likely for at least the last 20 or 30 years. In a report by an American think tank, the Millennium Project, that 4CF, my company, represents in Poland, published in 1997, the first State of the Future report, first or second edition of the State of the Future report, emphasized that there is a consensus between epidemiologists all over the world and virologists that a global pandemic of influenza or of another affliction is going to materialize sooner or later. A really significant epidemiologic event with pandemic reverberations, with pandemic consequences. So for the scientists who study the spread of viruses, how they mutate, how they evolve, how they move around, how they cause illnesses, it has been a given already that this is going to happen someday. Of course, no one exactly knew, because of the biological, the microbiological, the evolutionary characteristics of how these microorganisms evolve and how the illnesses they cause evolve, nobody could predict for certain when exactly it was going to happen. This is why when we were doing this scenario exercise last year with the Polish Ministry for Infrastructure and Investment, who has now its successor is the Ministry for Development and Ministry for State Assets, we decided, even though we were challenged and we were discouraged from doing this, to use the global pandemic as one of the 3 scenarios that we are going to present. And this was, to some, it seemed like an odd one, because it was not about climate change as such, it was not about biodiversity, it was not about national security threats or military security threats. It was about a possible outbreak of a novel virus in Asia. We were, of course, targeting a different country with a different affliction, because we're looking at influenza and its consequences, and the ground zero being India, and cattle being an important factor in all this. So in one way, you could say we got it all wrong. We also timed it for the second half of the coming decade. But these are all, parts of a model that is not predictive. It does not convey our forecast when some event will take place exactly, or whether we feel that this event is good or bad. This is a mental model that is meant to stress test the imagination, just as you mentioned, Ralph, the imagination of decision makers, and work as a wake-up call for them, saying, okay, you're so embroiled, you're so much into the trenches of the current campaign. You're always fighting the problems of yesterday. You never spend enough time preparing for tomorrow. Until you do, until you get into a strategic foresight exercise, and until you stretch your mental muscle to consider a possibility that in the future, in the near future, there may be a very significant crisis, such as a global pandemic, and then we should perhaps consider its potential consequences, see if we are resilient and if we will get back into shape once it's finished, once it's over, and see how do we accommodate, how do we adapt to a new reality afterwards.
You've just summarized the next 2 hours questions very elegantly.
Well, yes, this is it. We are now into the we are in the thick of the things.
Yeah,
this is happening. What was a model and a reframe for last year is now a reality. So people have been asking these questions for a long time already, but now it's everybody's concern.
Yeah,
it's on everyone's mind. So
we're asking some very hard questions.
Indeed.
And the sort of questions that we haven't asked, or but should have. Stay there, Kacper, don't go away. I know that you won't. To help us discuss these very difficult questions of the likely effects on our society and our businesses and our culture, we've asked the CEO of the Institute of Health and Democracy to join us and lay out the big picture of what we might expect. Joining us now is Robert Mołdach. Robert, in addition to being a policy guy, you're also a pilot.
Yeah.
And keenly interested in the economics of aviation. Do you think we could start by what we may be able to learn from a previous industry crisis, and to take us then into today?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we have some experience. We have learned something from some crises that the world have experienced over last decades, and maybe the crisis which I'd like to come back is the crisis of 9/11 and what happened in 2001 with aviation industry. Just to recall that on that day, on that tragic day, the aviation industry stopped its operation for 3 days. 3 days. After 3 days, on Friday, the 14th of September 2001, the aviation resumed. Of course, the aviation didn't resume immediately. It was done step by step, but the crisis continued for 3 days, not for a week, 2 months, 3 months, or half a year, right? And the lesson that we learned after these 3 days is that 3 years after, value of shares of key aviation companies been many times lower than it used to be in 2001, with one exception of few exceptions, companies well known like Southwest or Alaska Airlines, right? So the lesson is that we don't recover fast from such crises.
Let me just get that straight. You said many times lower, not a percentage lower.
Yeah, the percentage was, Southwest was 20% lower, right? The companies like United or airlines have been like 80–90% lower.
And
right?
many never recovered and were bought.
Yeah, and then there've been a lot of market changes after that. Look what happens today with shares of Delta or other companies. They are at the level of 20–30% what they used to be a month ago, right? So that's the crisis which we are now experiencing, and this crisis didn't go away fast, because not only of restrictions, but because people perception of safety of flying changed. And the question is, how will safety of living change after the current crisis? How long will people be afraid of going out of homes, meeting in theaters, meeting in coffee bars, and so on? So what we should consider, that the current crisis, which is mostly discussed in terms of healthcare outcomes, should be equally analyzed, discussed, or learned in terms of economical and social outcomes or restrictions which today happen.
So right now we're concentrating on saving lives, but very soon we'll have to look at saving livelihoods.
Yes, we are now saving lives. We are now saving lives. One comment about saving lives. We also should put it in perspective, because every day we receive dozens of data how many people unfortunately have died or got sick. But let's imagine that when we consider the children mortality, worldwide children mortality, up to the age of 5 years, yearly worldwide, this is over 5 million children die. That means daily die 14,500. Over our conversation, 2-hour conversation, there will be 1,200 children dying over our conversation. Also in Poland, if you take it into the perspective of Poland, let's assume that daily in Poland there is over 1,200 people just unfortunately go away because of many reasons, but because of cancer, because of cardiovascular diseases, other diseases. So I think the first lesson is about perspective, right perspective and right allocation of resources. The second,
what value healthcare, right?
Yes, how to value healthcare. We today are in such a moment when we believe and behave that life is the ultimate value. Yes, and I agree with that. But already in Italy, we are learning that the doctors have to choose between lives of one patient against the life of the other patient. Slowly but steadily, we are learning that applying all the resources to fight with coronavirus, we are not taking that much care about other patients. We didn't yet learn what impact on their lives it will have. And then in the economical side, we just last 2 weeks we have heard what are the economical responses projected by various governments, and the question is how much our economical systems are resilient, because we are reaching the end of resiliency of the healthcare system right now. Then economical system have resilience for how many months? I can ask it everybody here listening to us, for 3 months, for 6 months? That's an open question. How long this crisis can continue, and what will happen if somebody finally say, people, you are safe. All right, there is the lockout is ended and you are safe, you can go free. And I'm not sure what will happen at that time. And then that's why I want to come to this societal element, that this crisis changes our, not only our behavior, but the way we judge the world around us. It changes the way we live, of course, but it also changes our perception and belief what is safe, what is not safe, what is right and what is not right. And I know, and I am also on this side, that it may bring a lot of good things, like all kind of we can learn. I mean, e-health, telework. Even in Poland, we see an expansion of e-health services, which a year ago were not so popular than it used to be. So there are good elements of learning from the crisis. But my question is the opposite. I mean, what will happen with our social relation, with our economical systems after the shutdown is off and we have to resume normal operation? And,
let's stop there for a moment, and let's bring on our next guest. Interestingly, the Wikipedia definition of public health practice defines it as the science and art of preventing disease, prolonging life, and improving quality of life through organized efforts and informed choices of society, organizations, public and private, communities and individuals. It sounds like one of the more complex challenges that I can think of. And to enumerate on those challenges, we thought we had to hear from one of the leading public health professionals in Poland, Agnieszka Gaczkowska. Welcome to the virtual global summit, Agnieszka. How do you balance the science and the art of preventing disease in a time like this?
Well, there's not a lot of space for art right now. I think it's mostly action and science. So I'm not involved right now currently in COVID-19 outbreak prevention in Poland. I can tell you how it works from the community, community health clinic. I can tell you that in my definition, like in my opinion, our system is, in general, there is no systems that would be ready for this kind of event. This is some kind of stress test for healthcare systems. It has never been done in modern times on such a big scale. So far, we had only some examples of small epidemics. Ebola was super small, or like SARS in 2003 in China. That was local, actually, comparing to this, what we're dealing with right now. And so we can only compare our preparations for this event, for example, to China, which should be prepared better, right? Because they had a chance to, let's quote it, practice on SARS. After 2003, they remodeled the healthcare system and tried to be as ready as it's possible. However, even then they had problems. So comparing that to other healthcare systems that actually never faced this kind of stress test for them, we can only say that we're not ready, and that's for sure. But for the future implications, because I can tell you that, but I'm more excited about that, because for sure after someone will come out and say, yeah, this is the end, we can go out right now. I believe that healthcare systems will change, and they will be better prepared. There will be bigger investments in R&D. There will be some kind of international and national coordinations for this kind of events, because we have to be aware that this is not the last time. I mean, maybe it will happen next 10 years or 20 years, but for sure the neglected area, because it is a neglected area. Public health is not a sexy sector to invest in.
Healthcare is having trouble getting funded pretty much everywhere.
Everywhere, right? Because it takes a lot of time to see outcomes. It's not very, politically.
And it's a cost.
It's only a cost.
Very good.
In a short time. Yeah, in a short time period, it's a cost. Yeah, but in a short time.
Benefits come over decades.
Exactly. So it hasn't been a very, very desirable place to put the money in for governments. But I think in the next few years that will change, and for sure the bigger money and maybe smarter money, I would say, would go there. So I hope.
So you think
that will
both
happen.
private and public money, and a lot of it?
Yeah, I hope. It's not only about money. It's more about thinking about it, structurizing it, being prepared. In general, thinking more global, not only local, but also global. So I believe that it will change.
On a larger note, the pandemic has painted a somewhat grim picture of the relationship that a lot of people seem to have with medicine in the specific, but science in the more general, fake news and conspiracy theories instead of facts and the scientific method. Do you think we can shift that?
It's not a new thing. It happened before in previous pandemics. Maybe for sure there was no tools like internet or social media.
You'd think we'd know better, right?
Yeah, you think you would know better. There were plenty of there were some different kinds of fake news in previous times during previous epidemics. But for now, I think it's a sign of times, right? It's not only here, it's in every field, right? It's not only in healthcare, it's not only during this event. So fake news, it's a bigger problem. I'm not an expert in this, but I think that when we're talking about medicine, we're talking about public health, we always have to look in good resources. I mean, WHO, CDC, these are the places, the information, and they're very well prepared. I mean, they're sharing tons of information. So if you're looking for alleged information, go there, go to this website. Don't look at the link on Facebook wall, because that's just not smart.
That may or may not be true.
It may or, yeah, exactly. The other thing is that, we have to look for like a very realistic information, because it's regarding our health. So don't take actions before checking that at least 5 times, right?
That it will.
Yeah, so because that's your life. Yeah, you have to be.
Agnieszka,
you have to be very careful.
Stay there. I know you're not going anywhere.
No.
Let's bring on our next guest. If you mention the word design to most people, It brings on images of high-priced lemon squeezers that look like alien creatures. Thank you, Philippe, for that. Of course, that is a very superficial view. Design is, in fact, a practice which shapes most of our interactions with the world. And the best designers are thoughtful individuals who spend their days not just drawing pretty shapes, but rather thinking about why people do the things they do. One of the best ones in this country is Aga Szóstek, who has spent much of the last few years studying people's habits and perceived needs. Aga, do we do the things we do because we have always done them? I think this now is a problem.
Yes, indeed. So we are on a lockdown for the third week now, right? And the schools are closed, universities are closed, shopping malls are closed, people are working from home. So it seems like everything has changed. But is it going to stay like this? Actually, there is this phenomenon which is called positive adaptation, which basically means that when something happens, either dreary or super happy to us, we put our attention to it because it raises a lot of emotions in us. But over time, these emotions flee, and basically we come back to normal. And this is actually an evolutionary threat, because when we were supposed to survive on a savanna, paying attention to one thing would have basically got us eaten very quickly by whatever creature was creeping around in the bushes. So this is a natural thing that when we have to go lower on our emotions simply for the fact that we have to focus on survival, we have to focus on all the other things that are happening around us. But so basically what happens is that as humans, we have a tendency to try to go back to the normal situation. So we try to bring back the status quo that we had before. And this is the notion, or this is the hope of majority of people right now in the world. They kind of hope that things will get back to normal within the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You can hear different predictions there.
Not if they've been listening to this program for the last few hours.
That's true. Oh, absolutely. So the thing is that it takes some time for new habits to form. So if this lockdown happens as it is being predicted for another month, maybe 2, maybe 3 even, suddenly the habits that have been status quo even 2 or 3 weeks ago are not going to be the status quo anymore. They are going to change. They're going to evolve into a new status quo, in something that we get used to and we don't question it anymore. So basically, the whole discussion about remote work, remote education, remote whatever that we face, it needs time to get rooted into our ways of acting, and then we will be able to actually do it in a way that stays with us.
So with society hitting this big reset button now, how are we going to see the practice of design itself adjusting to this new reality? How are designers going to be advising their clients about the nature of our consumption of their products and services? This is never going to be the same again.
Yeah. So actually, this is a very interesting moment for designers. Or maybe it will be a very interesting moment for designers when people start getting used to the situation as it is right now. So basically, the complexity theory says that when you reach chaos as a state, this is the best place for innovation, because all bets are off and you have to understand how you want to find yourself in this new unusual situation when the old ways are not working anymore. So apart from the challenge for us as designers to figure out how we are going to do our work, so how we are going to design, this will actually bring a lot of potential for coming up with new concepts and for testing things. And the thing is that with innovation, the problem typically is for designers that companies are very reluctant to do things that are radically different from how they were operating before. So actually right now it can be a very interesting moment when companies come to designers like myself and say, hey, help me because I don't know how to do it. And this
that's
is
not because they're silly or evil. It's because nobody knows how to do it.
Exactly. But the thing is that designers have the tools and the approach that helps companies to figure out how these things can be understood, how they can be designed for, how can they be resolved. And basically, designers are going to help companies to see what is going to work and what is not going to work in the future.
Okay, let's just stop there for a second. This is the Boma Global Virtual Summit, and you are watching the Boma Poland segment, where we are discussing the context and consequences of the pandemic. If you have questions, please head over to our Facebook page if you're not there already, facebook.com/Boma Poland. Can I say our telephonists are standing by? Would that be an old school thing to say? Above all, I think the virus has amply demonstrated how connected we are in so many ways. Its spread wouldn't be so terrifyingly fast if we didn't have millions of people covering vast distances in hours. Travel is a natural thing for so many of us, but over-tourism has threatened many iconic locations with destruction. This somehow, the reset button is being applied to tourism as well. Sustainable travel has been at the center of the work of Noll and Audrey Scott for quite some time. They are among the world's highest profile travel bloggers and advocates for conscious, respectful, sustainable travel. Welcome to the Global Virtual Summit, Dan and Audrey. A tricky question to begin with, if I may. Does travel have to get expensive in order to become sustainable? And what role does sustainability play, if any, in the rebuilding of the tourism industry or the coming necessary rebuilding of the tourism industry? And we've still got Aga on the screen. Dan and Audrey, if you guys could turn on your various communication devices, that would be most awesome, so we can see you. Not that we're not enjoying Aga's lovely smile, but the general idea is to now enjoy Dan's and Audrey's lovely smiles. And here they are. Welcome. So yeah, does tourism have to become expensive to be sustainable? Where does sustainability actually fit into all this?
Wow, how do we begin to boil that down? Yeah. First off, thank you for having us. So I think there are probably a couple of ways to approach that question. And the first is to see what the answer to that question might have been before the crisis. And I think the straight answer to that is no, it doesn't necessarily, and it did not necessarily need to be expensive, sustainable tourism, that is. There are many different forms of sustainable, responsible, respectful tourism that can actually be relatively low cost.
And just a reminder that when we're talking sustainable tourism, we're not just talking about the environment and conservation. We're also talking about socioeconomic factors and also community. And there's a lot that can be done at the local level and at the community level that doesn't have to be high cost. That said, there are a lot of efforts that do need some investment up front for sustainability, whether it comes in terms of efficiencies or also fair wages, making sure people have fair wages as well as labor laws, as well as protection. That's something that's coming up right now quite a lot when we're finding out that there's a lot in tourism who don't have sick leave and other protections. So I think there's a balance. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but there often is a trade-off in terms of some investment and some commitment.
So somehow tourism has become this sort of unfortunate petri dish of how avarice on the part of some people in the society is interacting with the local living conditions of others. This doesn't need to be so, and it cannot remain so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you mentioned over tourism before, I think this crisis actually shines a light on that in terms of the destinations like Venice, like Barcelona, like Iceland, places that we're experiencing over tourism. Is there an opportunity now to use this pause button to rebuild tourism in those places in the way that those destinations said that they wanted them, where it was focused on local people and benefiting, you know, the local community and the businesses there?
I think it's also important to note too, I don't know if everyone who's listening to us understands the magnitude of travel and tourism sector. 10.4% of global GDP. 1 in 10 jobs goes to tourism and travel throughout the globe. And there are a couple of ways to think of that. On the first order, that is enormous. And then on the second order, the effects that it has through the various supply chains and the purchases that happen. Travel and tourism is a socioeconomic force. And I think the opportunity with respect to sustainable tourism and sustainable travel, Ralph, is that there is an opportunity to broaden the definition of sustainable tourism and sustainable travel. That's what this crisis has presented us with. That is the potential silver lining, is to look at all the socioeconomic, the community forces, all the things that Audrey talked about, to broaden that definition, because so many other people really think of it just in terms of environment, crucial but not complete. In terms of facets like over-tourism, crucial but incomplete.
Once these new cards have been dealt, there will be some unlikely surprising winners, as well as entirely predictable losers. Airlines will certainly take a long time to recover, as we've already heard from Robert. But can we assume that the entire travel sector will be hit in similar ways, or do you see variation on the ground?
Well, certainly there's going to be variation. And one of the things that's happening in the conversations we're having, and this is with small and medium enterprises at the community level, it's with NGOs, it's with public sector actors, it's private sector clients of ours, tour operators. This is actually taking a page out of what Kacper spoke to, and that is the importance of scenario planning. It's incumbent upon us, and there's an opportunity to look forward and say, what are the range of possible outcomes, good and bad? And then ask ourselves in our situations, what is it that we can and should do to respond to those various outcomes? So I think there's a tendency to worry and be urgent. And obviously we're in a crisis, and that makes sense. But the opportunity here is to flex our planning muscles. And, you know, to use the words that Kacper mentioned, a mental model to stress test the imagination for the futures of our businesses, no matter how big or small that they're going to be. And in terms of where the winners and losers are, I think we would be dishonest, and we would be in misalignment with the advice that we're giving our various clients. We don't know exactly how all this shakes out. What we can do is align ourselves with the best sort of philosophical practices and the best business practices to guide ourselves through very, very rough territory.
But I do want to say that people are going to start traveling again once they feel safe. It's something, tourism's been growing like crazy the last few years, so there might be a bit of a pause button. Obviously there is now, but there will probably be more focus on regional and domestic locations in the next perhaps couple of years, where people don't want to risk or have, you know, the nightmare of being stuck around the world and borders closing and flights being canceled. But people will still travel. It's something that I think that's not going to go away. Just how we travel might be a little bit different. And I do hope that there is more focus on the impact that travel does have on the local communities to try and make it as beneficial to them as possible.
Well, let's hope it does turn out that way. Travel apparently broadens the mind. But as the disease spreads, so does xenophobia and willfully fomented racial hatred. How can we work to broaden more minds, just as the image of easily accessible travel is fading from view?
Well, I think one of the first things I think we can do is just ask ourselves in any practice, whether it's travel or otherwise, and look to our better selves and keep in mind that the various ways that people are reacting to this crisis is a function of the various stresses on them. And so I think there's a certain level of compassion, that we can have for all actors, no matter how bad they tend to be reacting to this, and then also have a little bit of compassion on ourselves at the same time. And this is the thing about travel. Travel enables us to develop this compassion by visiting various places and interacting with different people. I have a feeling there's probably sort of more difficulty and more bad news on this account. But if we go about this right, we could potentially find ourselves on the flip side of this a little bit better off if we positively adapt to it. I think one of the other things that's happening through this process is we're developing a different vocabulary. We don't know it yet because it's happening on the fly. And that's true with travel. And I think it's true with things like even the nature and the breadth and depth of human interconnectedness. We thought we sort of understood it as travel professionals, and now this happens. And that's really informed, and it's going to continue to inform just sort of the depth of our sense of the world.
I think that's the right moment to just hang on for a couple of minutes and move on with our next guest. And I don't know about you, fine people, but one of the subjects that I've heard most talked about over the last few days, certainly over the time of my humble little self-isolation here, working from home, has been education in the broadest possible sense. On a simple level, what the hell do you do with your kids all day? And then on a kind of a broader perspective, how do you keep up with your own continuing development in a time like this? Luckily, there are people who have been working on these questions for quite some time. Among them, our next guest, joining us from London, Atish Gonsalves. Atish is an innovator in the distance learning space, a field which I feel is going to be a lot more important as well as a lot more popular than it has been. Atish, tell us, how can you learn using a mobile screen or a small laptop? The kind that for most people. How is that even possible?
Hi, Rolf. Yeah, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'd start first by saying that education really hasn't changed a lot since the Industrial Revolution. So, I mean, in terms of how we've been educating children, how we've been educating university students, people for the workforce is broadly been sort of in these sort of batches, and it's been also increasingly quite knowledge driven. So there is a sort of false choice in terms of when we look at learning between very engaged, well-facilitated workshops, which tend to be in person, not always, and online learning, which tends to be associated with self-guided, what I call PowerPoint on steroids, or on a little mobile phone, you click a few buttons, and that's great. It has its place in some cases around knowledge dissemination, but it's not necessarily learning. Learning should be much more experiential. It should be much more practice-based. I mean, if you think of like a pilot, they would go to a vast amount of theory, but you will not put them into a plane without having them go through a flight simulator. We need to have that same sort of thinking for other types of skills, whether they're soft skills, quote unquote, or more technical skills. So in terms of the effort to democratize learning and not just knowledge, the democratization of knowledge started with things like Wikipedia, where more people had access to information. Democratization of learning started with things like Coursera and edX and Udacity. So these kinds of initiatives making experiential practice-based learning opportunities more accessible to the public. So we've been sort of doing this within the humanitarian sector through things like the Kaya platform that we've been using to train aid workers and volunteers around the world, and not just through massive open online courses or MOOCs or through self-guided learning, but through things like virtual reality as well, which we've been starting to roll out even on smartphones, where people are not just learning why it is important to protect vulnerable populations and work in really complex situations, but actually practice those behaviors by being in a virtual simulation and doing that virtual simulation on a simple smartphone. So it's not just seeing the smartphone, to your question, Ralph, but actually engaging with that smartphone and having a conversation with the virtual character. So moving much more towards sort of behavioral learning and practice and game-based approaches. I would say that the other part is also about making learning much more human and much more social. And again, now with our self-isolation that we're seeing, we're doing simple things like virtual lunches together over Zoom, or we're seeing virtual yoga sessions, etc. But if you think about, again, the most memorable trainings that you've been through yourself, it is quite often the subject matter that you've been able to get there, but it's been sometimes the sort of informal conversations or breaking bread together. And so how can we challenge ourselves to also bring more of that human to human element into the learning, bring in more coaching where we are encouraging and actually building into the instructional design or the pedagogy that human to human element and support, and opportunities for people to engage with one another, either one-to-one or one-to-many.
Of course, because technology and skills, as important as they are just part of the equation. Psychology, habits, rituals, in fact, are probably far more important in order for the skills and the knowledge to be imparted successfully. It sounds like a really difficult problem.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I think what is even more hard now, and I think what we've been sort of promoting, and this goes back a bit to sort of the design approaches as well that we look at, for good learning to be designed, you need to ideally involve your learner or your user in the process. And that usually involves things like design workshops where you're going through the entire design process. And usually we've done this locally with grassroots organizations. Again, very difficult in this sort of context, but it's doable. I think it takes effort. Dare I say, it takes love to put that effort into sort of really building that connection, really hand-holding people and saying, this is a new technology, or this is something new we're doing, and going through that process and working with your end user and audience to create meaningful learning and to create learning that is relevant and accessible. So how can we run a design sprint, for example, with multiple users over Zoom, for example? And actually there are the additional digital challenges, but there's also really interesting opportunities, because now you can design a learning where you have people involved in that process who are from very different geographies and different cultures. And this opens up huge opportunities even at the school level, where students are learning together with classmates from their neighborhood, but they could also be learning with classmates from around the world. So I think in all of this challenge, there may be some interesting opportunities, and people may finally challenge what learning really is and what knowledge is, and how we also try to involve users even over digital.
On a perhaps somewhat more down-to-earth note, do you think we're going to be seeing an increase in online education in what our mothers and fathers used to teach? How to cook, how to garden?
We're definitely seeing, I mean, just over the last few days, I mean, if you've seen sort of your LinkedIn feeds, there's a lot.
The last 10 days we've been somewhat preoccupied.
There's a lot of organizations, particularly in the sort of space I work around, online learning and adult learning and corporate learning. There's a lot of organizations offering everything from soft skill courses, remote working, motivating teams. So there's definitely people are seeing the market opportunity here. I think the challenge will be sort of working out which are sort of what are the things which are really going to add value and going to really support in this crisis, in this challenge right now, and where are just companies who are seeing a commercial opportunity and pushing a product. So I think it'll be difficult, but you're already seeing that. You're already seeing quite a lot of interest and acceptance by organizations who traditionally would have been quite reticent to accept online learning as a format.
And that indeed sounds like another very difficult problem because the whole of the earth has not been covered with a technology layer where I can go out into my garden and turn on my phone and somehow connect to a lesson that tells me where to plant carrots and potatoes, because of course that is exactly what I'm going to do next week. We don't have that layer of technology available, certainly not everywhere. So the temptation perhaps that you just mentioned may be to do more of the same thing, just ever so slightly different. But we're now in a time where doing the same thing really is not sufficient. So somehow this technology layer is going to have to be introduced by people who think differently. Are you seeing or hearing rather people asking those sorts of questions in your world?
I mean, it's quite early right now, and also the world that I work in the humanitarian sector, there's already quite a big digital barrier in a number of sort of areas that we operate in. So even when we talked about digital learning in the humanitarian sector, we would accept that there would be sort of a last mile where digitally it will be quite hard to reach, and then you have to equip the last mile volunteers, aid workers with the tools that they can take offline. So there is clearly
but then by the same token, we've not in the last fortnight.
Ralph, I think we may have lost you.
I think so.
Whilst we're waiting for Ralph to connect, I think just trying to guess what question he was asking. So I think, yeah, I think there's going to be challenges around how do you get learning digitally for communities who've not had access to digital, whether for cost or for reach. And also introducing digital into new areas, like we were talking about non-professional types of jobs. So looking at even things like farming and social things where we normally would not associate digital learning. So I think there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that the barrier doesn't then become even bigger for people who do not have access to the technology.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Ralph disappeared for a moment, and it's just this minor technical issue that we're handling. I'm going to replace him just for a minute, just by the time he jumps back to our webinar. My name is Susanna Lewandowska. I'm part of the Boma Global team, and Boma Poland represent. Thank you so much for this insight. And we also would like to wrap up this first part of our session when it comes to you, our dear panelists, expressing your opinions in your specific industries about the impact of the crisis. But we also have with us another expert who is Luca Mannucci, joining us straight from Milan. And Luca is an investor, and I would like to ask him on behalf of Boma Poland to please give us a little bit of an insight when it comes to how can we understand the implications of the crisis and all that we have been talking about over the past hour when it comes to financial institutions and the markets. I'm giving you the floor, Luca. Luca, are you with us?
Actually, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. Well, first of all, I mean, you probably have seen what's happening in the global markets. I'm not personally an expert on public market. I'm in fact a private equity and venture capital investors. But you see the dynamics is not very different here. So market has crashed, and what is happening is a post-crisis situation like we have experienced already in the past. We've experienced it in 2000. We have experienced it in 2008. Now this is not going to be very, very dissimilar for what we have seen in the past. So there's going to be turbulence, and we have seen global stock exchanges just falling and going down, and there is going to be more volatility in the next week, and probably also in the next months. Now, what is happening in let's say what is called the private markets, venture capital and private equity, is something a bit dissimilar, just because these asset classes, they typically are less volatile, also because there are no public prices, so the effect tends to be a longer term effects. Now, the underlying, unfortunately, is exactly the same. So the underlying is the global economy. And what markets are fearing at the moment, when I'm talking about markets, I'm talking about public markets, they're clearly fearing that the fact that we're going to shut down everything is going to have, and it will have, a strong impact on earnings. So, economies are kind of stuck. We will have some week of stop, maybe a couple of months. We do not know how long this is going to be. So certainly 2020, it's going to be a year that is going to be probably for most of the countries, for most of the economies, it's going to be a recession year. The extent to this recession today, it's unknown. I mean, I'm not a macro expert. I don't want to throw numbers. I don't think this is the panel to throw numbers, and I'm certainly not the right guy to do that. What I can tell you what is going to happen is that there is going to be an effect, and there's going to be an effect both on public, and there's going to be an effect on private markets as well. Now, the effect that this is going to have, and there's going to be this effect on companies, on whichever type of companies, is that probably companies, they will need more capital. So technology company as well as traditional companies, they will probably need to raise capital in the market, being private or public market. So they will need to go to the market, and they will need to raise additional capital. And this is going to be clearly a bit more difficult because the environment is already changing, and investors, they are tightening up a bit the possibility to provide capital to companies. Clearly, there's going to be a side effect. There's going to be a long-term effect. It's not going to happen everything from night to day, and we will see more effects in the coming weeks and in the coming months.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to announce that Ralph is back with us. But before I give the floor back to him to run this webinar, let me ask you one question, Luca. Everyone, I think everyday people are really concerned about whether they should be pulling cash from their bank accounts, whether they should be keeping them under the mattresses, so to speak. What can we expect when it comes to that? And this leads to the ever present question recently about inflation or possibly hyperinflation. What can we expect when it comes to that?
But again, I'm not a macro expert, so probably my opinion is not very important on this. But certainly, there's not going to be. I would not expect a major South American crisis with regards to banks. I think that central banks and central organizations are, reacting fairly quickly, and they have been reacting in the last few days, and certainly more, quicker than they have done in 2008. In general, central organizations are more prepared to manage and to face a crisis. At the end of the day, we have been in a very bullish, time frame, a very bullish cycle. But the last crisis was not very long ago. So we have a good example to follow, and they certainly know what they have to do. Now, the effects on macro, who knows? I don't want to say. Maybe maybe it's going to be a post-war effect. Maybe there's going to be just like a destruction of the monetary base. But again, not the right person to say that.
Anyway, thank you so much, and I'm giving the floor back to Ralph. It was really a pleasure to be with you just for a moment, but at least that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Well, that was a rude interruption. Never mind. Technology doesn't always do what we would like it to. In case you've just joined us, This is the Boma Global Virtual Summit, and you are watching the Boma Poland segment, where we are discussing the context and consequences of the pandemic in the broadest possible business and societal terms. If you have questions, please head over to our Facebook page if you're not there already. And we are talking to Luca Mannucci from Milan. Luca, perhaps just a change of pace, if we may, for a moment. When you look out your window and feel the vibe of the city, and think of your day job, to which, of course, I'm sure you are returning anyway every day, albeit remotely. What's the overwhelming feeling? Is it one of hopefulness, or is it one of confusion, or all of the above?
Ralph, I think it's probably all of the above. The first answer that I would have is clearly a lot of emotions. It's really strange at the beginning. I would say it's really strange to see a very vibrant and chaotic city to completely stop and to have a city which is basically a ghost town from one day to another. Clearly, the human being is it's at the beginning it's kind of scared by this kind of situation. So we're not used to that. It's the first time, and we have to adjust. Then probably adjustment kicks in. You get used to that, and at the end of the day, it's a comfortable situation. We have the chance to work from home. We are well connected. We're safe in our houses, and you can still do it. Clearly, I think there is an escalation also of fears, because we know that at the beginning we fear for our economical safety, and that's probably what's the first impact of such a situation. Meaning that if everything stops, you're afraid that something's going to happen to you economically. Then, of course, you start to fear for your life, because you see that around you have so many debts that then probably another level of fears kicks in. But also rationality, I would say, kicks in as well, and you kind of grip back to reality, and we know that this is gonna end up soon. So I think now the situation is, at least on my side, is completely under control.
Thank you. Let's hang on to that for the moment. And seeing as we're talking about business, let's turn back to Robert, because what I would really like to discuss is this idea where classical economics would suggest that as demand for products and services softens due to circumstances, the market adjusts prices, and in time demand starts to grow again. Except in this new reality, classical economics is probably somewhat out of its depth, because everyone is experiencing such softening at the same time. Lowering of prices, therefore, can only work short term. And then we take a couple more steps into this unknown future, and with fewer customers, businesses may need to end up charging more to cover costs, which will mean that only some will be able to afford the products and services. This is possibly a recipe for further increases in inequality, is it not?
Yeah, that's something we need to think about. First of all, before I answer your question, we need to distinguish two parts of the market. One is the market which can adjust its services, either by transformation or by going even deeper to what they've done so far. And we see here the change. I mentioned healthcare, which is changing in a positive way dramatically, right? Like telehealth. So healthcare is changing positively. To some extent, education, which we also discussed, has also changed or is being changed, because those educational elements are new tele-education elements are being brought to the market, and people seem to like them. Of course, they don't like to be separated, but when they stop be separated, we will have the mix of new technology, of new approach, and the old school. So there are markets which will improve. But what I'm afraid, and I'd like to raise your everybody attention, is that there are part of the market which doesn't, parts of the market which don't go that easily. I mean, all the services provided to people, we discussed that. It's all the tourism, right? We already heard that tourism may change, but then start with the services like those where we have to face or be in touch or be connected with other people, even in healthcare rehabilitation. It's not even rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation. I mean, things will change, and there is not an easy response how those markets should adapt, right? And that's what I'm afraid, that it's on one side it's an opportunity, on the other side it's a threat. The balance, I will not judge here what would be the balance, but my feeling is that there will be more things to do on the adjustment side than on the easy expansion of the business.
It seems that on the subject of adjustment, it may well be that universal basic income will somehow move from the activist circles to the boardrooms and then to the center of policy discussions.
Yeah.
And it will be good for business, I think. What is this likely to be happening more now that it has become patently clear that it's not just the needy who need help?
Universal income. The answer would be the capacity and the resilience of economical systems, because what those economies, different economies in Europe, for example, what they do, the response is different from the level where this universal income, like in UK, if I recall, is 80% of the salary, to the situation in Poland, where it's the support of the state is up to 40%.
But this is benefits. This is unemployment benefits, social benefits of different kinds. But the idea of universal income being money that you simply receive because you exist, and this is something that
people will demand it, right?
I suspect that it may well be so, not least because we have seen a great uprising of political will, if you will, caused by realization that climate change is real and it is happening now, and it is threatening their lives and their livelihoods. I think these groups of people and these are large groups of people, they are going to add items to their list of demands.
Yeah, I didn't want to touch all the social services. I mean that those who lost their jobs today or cannot perform, I mean, didn't lose yet, but cannot perform what they do, they today are going or already are receiving a kind of universal income. And the interesting question is what happens after the crisis, because it would be natural if people learn something that is good for them, more people will ask for, right? And that would be the conclusion which I would bring. I'm not a politician. I'm not a sociologist to answer the question. I'm just an observer of economical and social relations. And if something works, if people like it, if governments provide it, then it's quite difficult to say no. From now, it will not longer exist. I think to answer your question, my impression is that there would be much more interest from people in the universal income than it is for now.
As we're talking about taking care of people, if I could now turn to Agnieszka, and let's look at a situation that is somewhat different from what we're expecting. We're in the developed world, and even though the healthcare services may be struggling, at least we have them. There are 70 million displaced people in the world today. 25 million of them are refugees living under tents in places where nobody wants them. And underfunded international agencies are stretched to the max already caring for these people. So should the international community not be looking at those camps as places where far greater resources should be allocated, not least because as these people get hit very, very hard by the disease, they're going to want to move, and half of them are under the age of 18, so they are by definition highly mobile. They'll be looking to escape. So how, if you can, Agnieszka, comment on this, how can you tie the plight of the refugees with what is happening in our towns and cities, and actually draw a very, very, tight knot around this conclusion, because this is yet again another example of how we are so interconnected. Have we lost Agnieszka?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect.
Brilliant.
Perfect. Worked. So when I looked at this pandemic, one of my thoughts was, it's kind of funny that we always were afraid of next epidemic or pandemic from third world countries, and actually it came from a big city, Wuhan. So we're so afraid of Ebola. We're so afraid of so many other diseases, for example, from Africa. But actually, the disease came from very people-dense city right in the middle of China. So that was my first thought. But then, the thing is said that there's going to be huge problem with refugees in refugee camps, for example, which are based in Europe. It's true. And probably I think I know that I'm pretty sure that the European Commission has some programs designed to bring help and bring extra care for refugee camps. But I cannot tell you numbers, and I cannot tell you that if it's going to be enough. I'm pretty worried that it won't be, because we actually have huge problems, for example, in northern Italy, to maintain the epidemic in this region, and to maintain it, to keep it safe. And if it will hit at it, and it will hit places like refugee camps, it will be a disaster. There are some ways that they could, flatten the curve and make it slower. But I think there's plenty to do, but one of the crucial points I think will be local actions and communication over there. So that's my idea, but there is a huge risk, and it's that it will happen, and it will be a total disaster for those people and for the area around the camps.
Robert, would you care to talk about allocation of resources for a second, because it seems as though that is a very, very basic question to ask.
I think what Agnieszka has raised is probably the key question we should, and all governments and societies should answer, because we have limited resources. Whatever big they are limited. And we are now tending to use all of them on one action, which is perfectly correct, which is clear, and nobody questions that. But at a certain point of time, quite soon, maybe in a week from now, maybe in a few weeks from now, we will start to, or should already start to decide having limited resources. We need to decide whether how we allocate our potential of our economical systems, potential of our capacity of our health system, how much we help coronavirus patients, how much we help other patients, how much we help immigrants. That's a great question, how much we help immigrants, or maybe how much we help people in some other parts of the world we live in. And I think sooner we start to discuss it, it will be better for the whole population. We are living in the world of limited resources, and that's the reflection I think everybody should now take.
Aga, if we can maybe shift gears just a little and look at possibly some of the less grim and awful aspects of what's going on. Seems to me that all of a sudden the idea of community is in vogue again. From community-based microgrids, people are talking about photovoltaics, not just on their roof, but on their roof sharing with their neighbors, to community gardens where people grow what they wish and take what they need. It appears that city living may end up being less alienating as a result of this. Or am I perhaps reading it altogether wrongly?
I think that this is a scenario that can go two different directions. So naturally, when a crisis hits and people start noticing that their lifestyle goes down, the first reaction is to protect yourself. So this is the natural thing. People lock themselves in the houses, they avoid contacts with others. On the other hand, when this process continues, suddenly people realize that in order to survive, they need a community around them. And this is something that this is something that we may not see yet happening, but this will be something that can actually start happening over time. The interesting that is happening right now, which is absolutely fascinating. I did my PhD on sending social signals through the internet, so like I'm observing this with a great fascination, is how people connect online. So actually there is a whole new set of rituals and a whole new set of behaviors that starts being developed that basically brings people together, people who are not necessarily seeing each other that much in the real world. So there is a shift happening in our real physical environment, but there is also a shift happening in our virtual environment. There is this concept that has been recently named in Japan, which is called onnomi, which basically means drinking online. And this is something that is happening more and more. So people are not only meeting for professional conversations online, but they actually meet for social reasons. So if you are talking about community, I would talk about two different communities. So one is the physical one is the city, one is the fact that as neighborhoods, we might actually come together. We are going to, we can see that people are supporting each other, but there will be also virtual cities or virtual gatherings or virtual environments that will also bring people together in a very new, very interesting way.
This seems to point to an altogether new way of defining how we live in our homes. Apartment living is going to be redefined altogether when we spend more and more time at home simply as a result of the circumstances. And Aga first, and then maybe Luca. What are you expecting to see in terms of A, design trends, and B, investment and startup trends that may be already becoming apparent with people thinking about this far enough in advance and realizing that there will be an awful lot of people requiring all sorts of services and products that do not exist yet, and they will need them very soon.
So actually, I'll start with the fact that living in our houses and not leaving them as much is not a new concept. Actually, people have been living in houses and in relative isolation for a very long time in the past. So if you think about 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, people were living in local communities, and they were, sitting at home, working on the field, or working on other stuff, but basically spending quite a lot of time as a family unit, as a family gathering together. So this is something
it was a lot safer that way.
Exactly, for a number of reasons, right? So the thing is that we actually have those traditions, we just forgot about them a little bit. So this is one thing that I would like to stress, that perhaps we tend to think in terms of trends like virtual reality, augmented reality, which of course this situation will most likely speed up to an extent. But I think that there is a lot of uncovered potential for human behavior that helps people be together rather than be isolated, because I think that unfortunately technologies tend to isolate us more than bring us together, that we could actually rediscover again and see how we can incorporate into our situation as it is today.
Luca, what do you think? Where are you going to be investing your money and your partner's money when it comes to solving these yet unknown but now being defined issues of people spending a lot more time in the living quarters?
First, just a quick comment on Aga. I completely agree. But funny enough, technology used to take us apart in the first place. And now basically technology is bringing us all together. So I think the powerful line now is really that through technology we are rediscovering also the joy of community and being able to do things together. I don't know if this trend has already arrived, but in Italy people are partying through House Party, which is just an app that you can download on your phone. You can have a drink together at night. Clearly it's a virtual drink. It's not something that you really do, but in these times of isolation, I think it's as good as it gets. Touching on trends, and this is really, I think, a good question, because really, with this situation, and differently from many other crises, really technology is at the center of the world. So we have been using technology throughout this crisis, to do things. I'm talking about everything that is, actual now. Actual now is e-learning for our kids. Our kids immediately, we have been discussing the possibility to digitalize, school system forever. There's been, panels. There's been, discussion, worldwide discussion, and then suddenly in 10 days everything happened. So it was really a speed up of everything that it took forever in the first place. At home consumption, at home delivery. This is all something that is, we're seeing now. I'm not talking about smart working, because it's clear, it's clear for everybody. But probably, funny enough, we are now really reevaluating, the way we're working, and maybe all those meetings that we thought were really necessary. Now we're just realizing that probably they're not necessary for real. So in the future, I think that, a big trend is going to be towards B2B. I mean, everything that is consumer, will need to have the right infrastructure on the B2B basis. So we will see a lot of attention on everything that is related to centralized systems. So, we're able to do this through technology, to the backbone of the internet. I mean, there's going to be more and more attention on everything that is on the infrastructure level, for sure.
Well, when we were preparing for this summit, we were watching with growing anxiety the quickly increasing loads in all of the key areas and all of the key parts of the infrastructure of the internet. So one can assume that broadband is going to become a far more valuable utility than we have actually given it credit. And in fact, I suspect, and I wouldn't be the first to say so, all of a sudden we're realizing that broadband is the same level of utility as water and power. How is this likely to shift the investment criteria of private and even public investors? Are you hearing perhaps institutions talking about this already? Are you hearing startups trying to figure out how to build this new infrastructure? Because clearly it's going to have to be an order of magnitude greater, and yes, 5G, of course, with increased speeds and all those goodies is a big promise, but it hasn't been rolled out just yet in, shall we say, too many places on Earth.
No, I would say this issue actually has been on the agenda for quite some time already. Especially in the US, there has been a growing trend towards the build-up of data centers, and there are data centers pretty much everywhere now for a decentralization of all the computing power. I think there's going to be a natural increase in the same way that there has been. The only problem is that probably this increase is exponential in data. So if you look at, I mean, I don't have data with me, but if you look at data on months after months, there is an exponential consumption of data. So we will have to speed up that as well. And I guess that the way to do it, as you mentioned, is certainly through technology, so through compression and through additional technology. In the same way, if you want to make a parallel, we're doing the same way in farming. So the exponential growing of population is consuming more and more in an exponential way. So the lands that we have is clearly short reserves, and we need to find additional technology to be able to put more and more resources in the same land. We have to do the same way for data.
Thank you, Luca. Kacper, if I might get back to you for a moment and look at the nature of or the mechanics of our democracies. A number of countries are either in the middle of election campaigns or are about to have them begin for good. Poland is no exception. The government is telling us that everything will be under control by May, which is in itself doubtful, but that is possibly not the point. The point is that our electoral systems are going to have to change as a result of all this. Voting in person will probably be phased out over time. Voting by mail will become standard. Voting by phone will be rolled out quickly in many countries where it isn't being rolled out already. This may automatically disadvantage older voters and may disenfranchise entire populations. So what we are actually experiencing is about to start shaking the foundations of our democracies. Are those the sort of conversations that you are having with your clients, or are they seeing this sort of causality at all? Kacper?
Well, maybe not necessarily about how the democracy will evolve to adapt to a new reality. And also, I don't, personally, I don't predict the kind of change that you described to materialize, really, because, you know, by disenfranchising a large proportion of population who could not, through you know, using a secure means of IT and ICT cast ballot, that would be I don't think that is something that can be sacrificed just in order to, you know, to hold elections in time.
Well, we're talking Black Mirror.
Yeah, they can be postponed. So this is probably not the way what I would anticipate the democratic institutions. I would anticipate them to evolve. But of course, there are many unknowns that we discover right now. We didn't know that we had not known this, and where we don't have ready answers yet. One of them is, of course, the whole event business and the whole event community, the venues, the event managers, the organizers, and all, you know, all the business that was around this, but also the social significance of all this, of the power of convening. And, you know, from running workshops for 8 people to running big events for thousands of people, this is something that I've been asked several times. Because, you know, our experimentation with telepresence and holopresence so far has been, well, unsatisfactory.
Frustrating and disappointing, I'd say.
Yes. Well, what we are participating in now is a mature technology. You know, this has been around for 10 years or more, and well, the kind of video conferences that are easily available and free, you know, not quoting specific product that has enabled this already a long time ago. But for the power of convening and what it means for people socially, for networking, for sharing knowledge, this is one domain where I think we really do not fathom the consequences of the crisis yet. Of course, we should not also overestimate the impact of the current pandemic. You know, of course, I hope that I will not regret what I'm saying. Although I seldom make predictions like that, but this time I think we should not overestimate the level of change that it will bring. Reality is complex and emergent, and we do not have any rigorous prediction, reliable prediction on, you know, how this epidemiological threat will evolve over time when we're talking months or years, and if it will really affect our social norms in an order of magnitude where, you know, you would no longer have big business events or big concerts and so on. we should not be taking this for granted. We should not be assuming that our present reality is here to stay. This is what brought us here in the first place, yes? The poverty of imagination, the inability to imagine that future can be different than the present is. Had we had, say, you know, a better imagination, we could have probably had been better prepared to tackle this pandemic, even though, of course, like Agnieszka said, no system is resilient enough and no system is strong enough to you know, just on a business as usual basis tackle this kind of change. So you know, the way we think about the future matters a lot because it changes what we do in present. So I would advocate for you know, both for individuals, and this is what I say to my clients right now, that we should not also be imagining a future being you know, one of isolation, social distancing is there to stay for years, and this kind of the dystopian visions. There are still many things that could happen along the time, many novel emergent events from outside of the public health world of public health that can change everything. And we should not be, you know, even though we focus now on novel coronavirus and on COVID epidemics, this is not the only factor to our reality. We should not be forgetting this. It's not meant as a distraction. It's just meant as a reminder that, you know, no single thing can possibly be a defining feature for absolutely everything. Even the internet.
Life goes on. This too shall pass.
Well, we'll have to muddle through somehow. Yes. Maybe rather this, yes.
But then other problems haven't gone away, and they're not about to.
Yes, but with, you know, as a species, we are very good at adapting and at changing. You know, it took spiders millions, well, hundreds of millions, well, tens of millions of years to get to a point where they can weave a very fine yarn, yes, and
they can't exactly do a whole lot else.
Yes, and we as humans have looked up to them for millennia, saying, "Wow, we'd never be able to do this." And you know, snap, yes, we can. So a message of hope is, and a message of, you know, not a non-deterministic look at futures is one I think I would like to convey.
Thank you, Kacper. Let's take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in from various parts of the world, I see. From the very simple to the somewhat complex. To begin with, Colin from Paris, and I suspect this is a question for Agnieszka. What is going to happen in countries where water for hand washing is a luxury? Are we seeing positive solutions on that front? Seeing as we're concentrating on positive solutions, or trying to. Agnieszka, are you with us?
We're trying. It's very difficult to find a positive one here, because actually hand washing is a basic element of prevention here.
Of
right?
all
it's
hygiene,
like,
really.
Of all hygiene, but in this disease, it's like number one. And I'm assuming that if they're lacking in water, they're lacking in hand sanitizers, which is also a problem. It depends on the culture also, because it's a very general question, right? Because it like touching, being close to other people, and human behavior, this is a part of the culture that you grew up in. So it depends, I would say, where is the places, but lack of water would be a huge problem. I am not saying here something that is very surprising. A positive thing here, no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A question from Jackie, and I suspect Robert will take this one. how can people work around the political barricades that exist? I expect this is with a view to solving this problem and subsequent ones with which we are likely to get hit, working around the political divide or across it. Robert.
We are living in a world where this political divide is part of what we observe, what we live in. That's traditionally or historically the crisis. Stronger it was, easier it was to overcome such barricades. We already in Poland, probably in other countries as well, but I can speak for Poland, we already see that those barricades, they are far away of being, removed, but at least the relation is to some extent being improved. It was really bad, just a few months ago, and now at least both sides of the political scene started to talk to each other, which is, but that is still affected by our election, which is going to take part in May. So it's interesting. The question is the following: how bad it should be in order that this barricades collapse? And talking about Poland, I think that we are not yet in the bad situation. So we didn't feel that. We just have few people who, not few, every death is important, but comparing to other countries, few people who died from this disease. But in other countries that maybe, which already are in hundreds, I assume in Italy, colleagues from Italy may speak on that. That may change political relation or make it different.
Possibly, we should also look at the fact that nothing really is set in stone. As Kacper was saying before, things may turn out altogether differently from what we expect in time, of course. But then if we look at the nature of simply nature of change, it often happens in a way where nothing happens evidently. You can't see it for a long time. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's everywhere. Gladwell talked about the tipping point of Taleb, but black swans appearing out of nowhere, where we have one now. It's very black and it's very large. So nothing is set in stone, and we shouldn't take anything for granted.
Yeah, but I think we all agree that if the situation worsens, as you call it, this black swan has higher chances to appear. Unfortunately, that's a conclusion I wouldn't like didn't want to say, but that's the reality. And I agree. I absolutely agree with you that such a black swan may appear at any moment, right? But
for better or for worse, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, being quite realistic and living for quite a number of years already and seeing different crises in my personal life. So the experience is that when it, Poland, the 60 years ago, the solidarity movement, right? It had really to be bad, really bad to solidarity to grow, right?
Yeah, not much happened. Not much happened for a long time, and then it happened suddenly, and in many
places. It happened suddenly, but it wasn't such a situation that we've been in a great shape and enthusiastic people created the biggest social movement, solidarity. It was really bad. Emotions were extreme. People were suffering. In each dimension of their lives. And that's how suddenly solidarity appeared. And I don't have that impression that we are yet in such a situation in Poland. I would like the black swan appears right now, but being realistic of experience, I think that we unfortunately have to wait a few weeks until it happens.
On that note, and perhaps if I could go back to Dan and Audrey for a moment, not because you guys are political scientists, but because you have been everywhere. I'm wondering if all this is likely to lead to a world where some of those strong measures that have been put into place at the time of the pandemic will last a whole lot longer than the pandemic, leading to an altogether less liberal world with fewer personal liberties, more surveillance, and of course, less freedom of movement, or not. How do you think some of the cultures you've been experiencing over the last, God knows, how many years have you been at this? 12, 13, 14? I forget now.
12. Yeah, 12, 13.
It's a while. How do you think some of the cultures you've met would view this? Would they view it with sagacity or terror? Or would they submit to a sort of a Black Mirror dystopian future? Or would they say, no, that we don't want that and we're not going to have it?
Wow, we might have two different views on that. Audrey, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, just in terms of, I think one thing that's coming out of this is I think most people will probably never take crossing a border for granted again. After all this, or getting on a plane again, at least for a very long time. But in terms of many of the cultures that we've visited, they're high context, like they're, yeah, I don't necessarily know that this would be a long-term. They might separate themselves off for a bit in order to protect themselves, but I do think that eventually there will be pushback to try and engage more with the world. And also because of socioeconomic reasons, a lot of communities and a lot of places around the world actually do depend a lot on tourism. And so without that, there isn't a lot of options often in terms of other jobs or other opportunities. So there will be a pushback, I think, or there will be a push to open borders and to reduce, segregation or to reduce restrictions once the decision is made that things are safe.
And actually, even bridging from that discussion previously about technology, the good thing and the common thing about human beings is that they're human beings and they seek contact. So even once technology entered the travel and tourism sphere, travel and technology facilitated human contact, not the other way around. And getting back to something that Kacper said, if we can sort of rise out of the poverty of imagination, I think we have it in us to create solutions, the creativity to create solutions to get around this particular circumstance. It may just take some time. And then I think the other thing that we need to look at is building, we probably have a choice in front of us. And at least this is what we've seen in the travel and tourism industry, is that we have basically built fragile systems because we put growth at the forefront and squeezing out efficiency. Now we have an opportunity to do something different. And this also affects sustainability, but it also affects all of the things that we're talking about here that are going to enable us to travel. So we have a decision.
And this is not just in the travel business, this is everywhere.
Yeah.
Correct.
And this is why I love you guys. So part of working out the many solutions necessary for us to make it through what comes after the pandemic, global partnerships. And I need to start wrapping up because we just say that Boma, we're all about such partnerships. And over the coming weeks, we'll be announcing a number of them. We have several initiatives cooking. We dreamed this one up 10 days ago. And lo and behold, here it is. We have a number of ideas, and they are all centered on impact, on positive action, on trying to figure out, okay, we're here. Scientists had told us for years this was coming. Not too many people had listened. And well, never mind, we're here. Let's figure out our way out of this somehow together, so that future generations actually don't curse us into eternity, but actually maybe have a few positive things to say about us. So if you're a business person, if you're an artist, if you're a public administration professional, if you're a musician, engineer, software developer, cultural manager, medical practitioner, if you're a truckie, if you're a teacher, if you're a kindergarten person, really, everyone has something to contribute, and we would love to hear from you. We have no idea what we're going to build, but we are going to build it, and it'll be absolutely amazing. Not least because Boma is composed of people who just amaze me with their brilliance every day. We're a small but quickly growing group of humans, and we are committed to making the world a better place through, actual practical positive measures. I love tree huggers, but hugging trees is an activity fairly limited when it comes to positive spillover effects. So we hope we've been able to shed some light on some of the more broad aspects of the crisis. Thank you to all of our Polish guests, Kacper Nosarzewski, Robert Mołdach, Agnieszka Gaczkowska, Aga Szóstek, and Audrey Scott and Dan Noll from Berlin, Atish Gonsalves from London, and Luca Mannucci from Milan. And if I may say, big thanks to the rest of the Boma Poland team, who are totally fabulous. Down in the engine room, Filiberto Amati, Ola Dudek, standing by at the socials, and Zuza, who so brilliantly took up the reins when technology decided to give up the ghost on us. Thank you also to Marconi Pereira of Boma, Portugal, for his ongoing technical support of the stream. And finally, our grateful thanks go to our technology partners, Zoom and Facebook, and our media partner, Gazeta Wyborcza, here in Poland.